happy to have Henry Sokolski, who's going to speak to us on nuclear exports to Riyadh, risky business. The National Security Policy Speaker Series is a collaborative event jointly sponsored by the Non-Proliferation Policy Education Center, NPAC, in Washington, D.C., the Center for Peace and Security Studies here at UCSD, and the Korea Pacific Program at GPS. Henry Sokolski is the Executive Director of the Non-Proliferation Policy Education Center. He teaches graduate level courses on nuclear policy at the University of Utah and at the Institute of World Politics and on Capitol Hill. In fact, that's one of the, I think, most interesting features of his educator profile is that he's educating policymakers, not just future policymakers. He's also a senior fellow at the National Security for National Security Studies at UCSD's GPS. I'm very happy to have him here. I hope you will all welcome him and listen attentively and ask him some tough questions at the end of his talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Professor Gartsky, thank you for having me here. Also, I do take easy questions, too. Actually, I kind of like those. They're my favorite. Undoubtedly, you've read Google News or the news. And there's been a fair amount of discussion of what the United States should do with regard to cooperating. Should I stand right here? Is that the, I have, okay, I'm frozen. So much for Oprah, okay. The president seems to want to help Saudi Arabia get a civilian nuclear program. That means a large reactor. Others are not so sure. There are arguments under what conditions would it be suitable to make this export. There are arguments about what's at risk. Now, what's interesting about this topic, unlike, let's say, talking about Iran or North Korea, is the nuclear milk, in this case, has not yet been spilt. We can actually screw this one up, whereas the others are already kind of screwed up, you know? And so it's harder to be blamed, if you will, in those cases. This one, people are watching. So, perfect. That's what we're interested in. Okay, oh, let's do this. I'm sorry. Is this what makes it move?
That's an excellent question.
Yes, well, I'm all ears.
Oh.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah, I think from now.
So do I use this?
I think it was just
Yeah,
something else.
I was making it. I have a special spell on these things. Okay, so what are the questions we're going to ask for this brief? By the way, I'm a great believer in the Texas School of Presentation. Tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you told them. So here's what we're going to do. Do the Saudis need nuclear power or uranium enrichment or spent fuel reprocessing? Should we trust the Saudis not to use nuclear technologies to make nuclear weapons? Does the U.S. lack leverage over the Saudis, since they can always buy French, Russian, or Chinese reactors if they don't buy American? Won't a U.S.-Saudi nuclear cooperation agreement strengthen our security ties with them and be better than not having it? And are the proliferation implications of the Saudis proceeding with a nuclear program readily manageable one way or the other anyway? So those are the questions, and this is what's known as the gentleman sees brief. I can give you the answer. No. Okay, so that's simple. Now I'm going to elaborate. Okay, first question. Do the Saudis need nuclear power or enrichment or reprocessing? A lot of people talk about oil when they think of Saudi Arabia, and that's certainly important. But what is at least as important is how much natural gas they have. Now you'll notice over here, they're neck and neck with the United States with regard to natural gas reserves. That's pretty significant because, well, we are actually exporting natural gas ourselves. They have a lot. What's even more interesting is they have much more. These are the proven reserves. Over here, we have at least as much, if not more gas, in reserves that have not yet been tapped. They're shale gas. And does somebody here have, I mean, they keep repeating this number, so maybe one of you knows. What is all of the nuclear sales of reactors possibly worth if they go to their maximum program of 16 reactors? How many billion dollars do people say that's worth? By the way, you can get it wrong. It's part of your, actually, it's one of your primary missions in school is to get things wrong. Anybody want to be wrong? Go ahead.
I would wager it's probably a couple $100 billion. It can't be too much.
Well, it's 80 billion, so you got the order of magnitude about right. So that's good. See? Most policymaking is confident guessing. So, you know, this is, you know, you got to get into the habit of doing this. It was 80 billion. All right. Well, of course, that's a mythical number. They're probably only going to buy 2, maybe not any, and we'll get into that. But what if I was to tell you that by 2025, the Saudis claim they want to spend $334 billion to develop these natural gas fields? That suggests that maybe natural gas is more important than anything that could be developed with nuclear power. Now, you can say, yes, but it pollutes. Now, you know, I don't want to be sarcastic. I suppose there are Saudis that, you know, stay late up at night worrying about global warming. I don't know how many there are, but we care. Maybe that's the way to look at it. And, you know, gas is cleaner than coal. I mean, it can be as almost 60% less greenhouse gases, depending on what, you know, how sour the gas is. And it's not particularly sour. But what if I was to tell you that there's a plant in Texas that's operating? Here it is. It's Net Power. I like this one because it can fail. And we know it can fail because it doesn't have any government money in it. If you have government money in it, it's like ethanol. You can't ever admit, well, we're losing money. You have to keep going. This, if it doesn't make money, there's a venture capitalist involved, and he'll pull the plug. They have decided to make a bigger version of this plant, not 15 megawatts electrical, but 300, by 2022. And what's interesting about this plant is it has 0 emissions, but even more interesting, it's coming in at a competitive 4.4 cents. Does anybody know, and we'll get into this, how many cents per kilowatt hour people in the Middle East think nuclear power will cost, let's say, at the UAE plant? It's about 11 cents. Okay, so this is a low number. Watch this. We'll see whether this technology fails. It might. You know, if you're interested, I can explain what little I understand how this works, but it's definitely worth putting on your Google list of things to read once a month. How's that project going? Then we have solar. Now, solar in the Middle East is pretty serious, and the reason why is there's an awful lot more sunshine than there is even here. They do not have cloudy days. They do not have rain, almost none. And you'll notice that Saudi Arabia is drenched in some of the most intense solar radiation of any place in the world, both direct and total. There's even some wind. And what's interesting about that is this is the latest, one of the later bids. This was in April of last year. They actually bought solar panels at about 2.4 cents per kilowatt hour firm. Now remember the 4.4 and the 11? Okay, well, now you can say, yeah, but that's just during the day. for what it's worth, some bids came in at under 2 cents, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia said, we're not interested in that because we want you to employ more people in Saudi Arabia, so they went for the more expensive bid. So if anything, that's not the lowest bid. That's, comfortable. Concentrated solar power. Now, I was on the phone today with someone who was funding me, and I brought this up, and he said, yeah, but those aren't proven technologies. They're building these things, and some of them are operating. The one that's of most interest is this one here, solar park in Dubai, which is right next door to Saudi Arabia. 700 megawatts electrical. A large power reactor is somewhere between 1,000 megawatts, and at the upper end it can be as much as, I suppose, 1,600, but that's rare. Usually 1,400, something like that. Anyway, when you're at 700 megawatts electrical, you're in the zone. What does this do? These are mirrors. Some of you may have traveled into the desert and seen one of these things. There's one somewhere between here and Arizona, I think. I've seen it. It's quite fantastic. It was the precursor of this. It's old technology. It isn't very economic. This is. The sun is reflected onto a tower that contains sodium, and it liquefies it with heat, and that sodium stays hot so that you can boil water for 15 hours. So during the day, you heat this up, and then when it's 4 o'clock and it's Miller time, I don't know if that, does anybody, do they still use that ad? That's an old, I'm dating myself. Miller time, well, it's beer, I mean, it's when you stop working, you start drinking. Well, I don't know whether they do that in the Middle East, but the Americans there do, I'm sure. Okay, so what then happens is that sodium is used to boil water, and it produces electricity when the sun's dim or dark. It's a battery. The way to look at this is a battery. If you combine that with photovoltaic, you have 24/7 solar power. This is not an intermittent game anymore. What's interesting is the UAE bought 4 reactors back in 2009. Guess what? They're not buying any anymore. What are they doing? Oh, they're building this. And why? Well, even the concentrated solar is 7.3 cents. Yeah.
What's the price per kilowatt hour with nuclear?
I said about 11. Yeah. Now, we don't exactly know because it hasn't come online. Those are the figures that people in the Middle East are using. It could be higher. I doubt it'll be lower. Okay. To give you some idea, in the United States, it's higher for a new plant. The plant in Focal is now coming in at, let's see, almost $15 billion for 1.2 or 1,200 megawatts. You can do the math. It's going up, yeah.
2 quick points. You don't have to concentrate the heat sources. There's a lot of work out in the desert here, just with distributed systems heating water, not the boiling point, but just getting them warm, because that's then a heat source that you can use to generate steam from at night, whenever. The other thing is a big draw of energy in the Middle East is desalination, and solar solves that
problem. Well, everyone wants to solve the desalination problem with whatever they want to push. So some people say coal, some people say nuclear. But the price per kilowatt hour is the key. And I'm sure there are other technologies like what you're mentioning that I'm not aware of. And the point here is there are answers. These are not fantasies. These are competitors. And what's odd is this isn't even a market economy. One imagines what would happen if they stopped subsidizing certain things. In any case, concentrated solar with the cheap photovoltaic, natural gas. Here is a kind of summation. You'll notice that nuclear, which is down here, third from the bottom, is coming in at around 11 cents. And these were done by Quamar Research, which is based in Dubai. Robin Mills did it. Pretty solid research. I don't think there's any sort of bias towards Western markets here. I mean, these are local numbers. The numbers I've gotten out of Lebanon are similar. So, but my guess is these are low, maybe higher. The only things that are firm are the solar numbers, because you know what the capital costs are and you don't have to worry about fuel costs. So if anything, those may go down. The others may go up. Okay. All right. Then the argument is, well, okay, we just want it. This is what's known as a non-market argument. We really like this. I mean, we have ethanol. It doesn't make any economic sense. It doesn't even make environmental sense, but we like it because we like farmers, okay? And we like getting votes from farmers, so we have ethanol. We subsidize it. Then the argument is, and therefore we need to enrich uranium. When you enrich uranium to, let's say, 4%, you're roughly, depending on how you look at it, there are a number of available variables, but you're almost like more than halfway to going to weapons grade. And it's not intuitive, but it has to do with the ratio of the isotope you want, which is U-235, and the more plentiful isotope U-238. One is like 99.3%, the other is 0.7%. And so because of those numbers, when you get to 4%, you've done almost all the work you need to go to from 4% to weapons grade, which is close to 80 or 90%. It's one of the reasons we're not wild about, let's say, the Iranians enriching to 20%. And we said, don't go beyond that. We don't want you to hold on to stockpiles of 20% enriched uranium. It's because it brings you very, very close to weapons grade, and that the distance in time to take that material and enrich it to weapons grade is quicker than you can intervene to prevent it from being done. That's called timely warning or timely detection. You don't have it when you start enriching. So first point is there's plenty of uranium. The spot price is quite low. This is even more important. There are plenty of enrichment services in Europe, in Russia, in particular, they're for export and sale. And as a result, right now, it's coming in at an all-time historic low. There's more supply than there is demand, and it has something to do with the unpopularity of nuclear power. It was supposed to be more popular. And despite build-up and build-outs in China, the rest of the world's turning downward in what the original plans were. And so you have the enrichment services all dressed up, ready to go to party, but there's no one to take out on a date. By the way, that's a short answer for why the first question is no. Okay. Should we trust the Saudis not to use nuclear technologies to make bombs? Well, Now, I got into this debate before the murder of Mr. Khashoggi. And I was very eager to say, well, we should demand that they forswear enriching and reprocessing. We had demanded this in a nuclear deal that we had cut with their neighbor, the UAE, back, I believe, in 2000, I think it was 9. And they agreed. So, hey, come on. Things have changed. I don't make that argument anymore. Here is one reason why. Even before the murder, it's pretty sporty to have the person who is the embodiment of the entire government, because guess what? Whatever he says pretty much happens. It's one-man rule. Saying, well, we want to have a peaceful nuclear cooperative agreement with you, but let me reassure you that if we think the other fellow next door is getting a bomb, we're going to get a bomb. Yeah, but you signed a treaty saying you wouldn't get a bomb. Oh, well, but if they get a bomb, yeah, that's all over. Now, it may well be that this was the case with other countries when we struck nuclear cooperative agreements, but they had the decency at least to lie about it. This is brassy. This is even before the deal is cut. So that raised a couple of eyebrows. That one's new. I mean, even the Shah of Iran whispered that. He didn't rub it in our face while we were negotiating nuclear cooperative agreements. Now, if it was the case that it was an idle bluff, you could just say, well, it's an idle bluff. Problem is, there's a history of the Saudis doing things in secret without letting us know that have been pretty upsetting to the US government. And these missiles, the DF-21, the CSS-2, were acquired from China without our knowledge. We found out about it after the deals were cut. There is also here a missile factory that the Chinese are building. They did not confide in us. Now, you could say, well, why the heck should they confide in us? It's because, to a very great extent, their security depends on our helping them with intelligence and arms sales. And our diplomacy with regard to maintaining the Gulf freedom of navigation is non-trivial to their ability to get their product out to customers. So it's not like we're absolute allies, but we're pretty close. At least that's what I'm told. So this is not the kind of behavior you would want from a really close ally. Then there is this. By the way, this is, again, did I mention, this is all before the Khashoggi murder. They have the only agreement, the last agreement, I should say, that is called, that has a small quantities provision in it. This is an exotic term of art. But what it means is they do not have to notify anyone of any facility that might have enriched uranium, plutonium, even natural uranium in it until a certain number of kilograms have been inserted. That means they can secretly build an enrichment facility legally under this agreement and not notify anybody until they insert some material into it. This was the very thing that drove us fruit with the Iranians. Now, in defense of the Iranians, I think it can be argued that they hadn't, in their agreement, quite agreed to make this notification yet. And they said there was a dispute over whether they had or they hadn't. Here, it's quite clear they don't have that obligation, and they have been insistent that they don't. You would think they would update this. The IAEA has been quite emphatic with the diplomats in Riyadh that this needs to be changed. It has not yet. Then there's this. We went from, oh, he got out a few minutes or hours late, to, well, this is a crime that is painful, to admission that he was murdered, to, please don't bring this up. We're very upset that you're upset. Please be quiet and go away. Now, you could say, well, but that's an individual. I mean, never mind that he's a U.S. resident. I guess we don't care about that. I mean, I guess I do. Not, you know, maybe somebody doesn't. But if they're willing to do that with this, what about their pledges on something like, well, we won't make nuclear weapons? I don't think this is a good look. Now, if it was just this, it would be, you know, bad, because this has got a lot of publicity. But, you know, you can take a look. I'm not an expert on human rights in Saudi Arabia, but it's not great how they deal with certain things. And so you'd want something this visible to be corrected somehow. I mean, I don't know. You know, there are lots of different ways to do it, so I'm not. But because of this, I think it would be very difficult to believe that they might not cheat. Then the question is, oh, but well, don't we lack leverage because, well, they can always buy somewhere else? This is what's known as, I guess I referred to this. Does anybody know what the argument was by the British to stay in the business of selling slaves in the 1700s? It was really kind of a despicable argument. You got to be in the trade to control it, was the argument. Now, luckily, the British turned around on that. Took a long time for everyone else to turn around on that. But the argument here is not that different in some respects. It's that, well, we have to be in the business because someone else will do it. And it's better us than them. And we will put more controls over it. Okay, well, let's take a look at this. I mean, I don't want to disqualify the argument, but it has a strange and unsavory lineage. First of all, the argument that America has leverage over nuclear sales to anybody right now is a bit of a stretch. I remember testifying when Westinghouse was wholly owned by the Japanese and the Kazakhstanis and pointed this out. At the time, there were some congressmen who were, let's just say, were very tight with the industry, and they said that must be struck from the record. They didn't want anyone to know that every penny of profit for the nuclear division of Westinghouse went out of the country. No American got a nickel. It's headquartered in Pittsburgh. A little different. Technically, legally, it's an American corporation, but it's not owned by anybody who's American. Now it's owned by Brookfield, which is a holding company, Canadian. So it's not like it's the Ford family or something. I mean, it's American technically, but it's not, you know, an American firm all out. More important, it does not make or manufacture anything anymore. It does design work, and the things that it sells that are that are tangible are made by other vendors, and they put their nameplate on it, and it goes. Right now, that's pretty much coolant pumps. There may be some process control equipment, but it's not much. We're not talking about the reactor vessel or any of the big components in the nuclear island. More important, the Saudis have made it very clear that they're much more interested in buying South Korean. To give you some idea, that original bid that they put out for several reactors had a megawatt limit on it that could only be fulfilled with what's called the APR 1400. And when they came out, every other supplier who was not South Korean screamed foul. I said, well, this is rigged. But they kind of showed their hand that now why would they be interested in the South Korean machine? It's because the South Koreans are building 4 of these machines right in the neighborhood. And they have a construction crew. Now, it turns out this project isn't going quite as well as it was advertised. It's falling behind, and it's falling behind because of safety issues. And there was a terrific article they call it MIT Technology. I should stop for an advertisement so I can. I can't get rich. I can't even get famous, but I need followers. So on Twitter, you go to nuclear policy, and everything that I ever want to use as a footnote is there. I don't make snarky comments. It's just, here's something I may not be able to find again. I have 3,500 followers. I could use 3,520. Anyway, if you go there is an article by the folks at MIT, and it explains why this facility has had safety problems. And it's because in Korea, they've cut corners to get the price as low as they did and to get it done as quickly. And as a result, there are safety issues. And there are safety issues not only here, there are safety issues, you guessed it, in South Korea. But that said, this is the best thing going. This was lowballed at about $6 billion per reactor, which is very low. To get this contract, the South Koreans not only lowballed the cost, they threw in some troops to protect Saudi Arabia, which was a secret deal that the South Koreans only recently found out about, and of course, everyone's outraged by this. But in any case, it doesn't get better than this, and that's one of the reasons why the Saudis think and have thought maybe we should buy from the South Koreans. That construction crew can be flown right in, and they're all experienced. So there's a lot of advantages to focusing on this machine. Now, there's another one. Most people don't know it, but there are about 50 Saudis living in Seoul. What are they doing? Oh, they're researching how to complete the design on this 100 megawatt electrical machine, which they claim, which I find hard to believe, will be built within the next 4 years. I think that sounds wrong. But the bigger point is the Saudis have invested in this project. There's real money in it. They own part of it. This machine alone could make several bombs worth a year and would warrant, they could argue, having an enrichment program. What's also interesting about this is those machines would be sold under an agreement with South Korea, struck in 2011. I managed to get a text of it. And it allows for enrichment without consent. This is starting to sound very attractive. Okay, what are the alternatives? Well, there's a Chinese plant, and let's be clear, there might be an interest in buying Chinese. We liked your missiles, we liked your missile factory. Maybe we want to sell oil to you. Why wouldn't we want to buy your reactor? Now, one short answer would be this one, unlike even the South Korean one, isn't licensed for any market outside of China or outside of the domestic area. And it won't be for quite a while. You might get lucky, you might want to take a risk, but you know, it's a lot of money. Might, you know, given nuclear power plants get to be delayed and they get expensive and they have safety problems, this is a little sporty. You can buy Russian. These machines, they call them VVER 1200s for 1.2 gigawatts, have a sort of spotty safety record so far. This one, they started up and it immediately had to shut it down. There also is another problem. Let's say the Saudis are serious about getting a bomb, or at least a bomb option. They say they are. Why would you want to rely on a vendor who's tight and thick as thieves with your key adversary, the Iranians? Wouldn't that risk them, the Russians, being spies in your own arena? People say, oh, well, they might buy Russian. Maybe. I don't know. Doesn't sound right to me. All right. Then the argument is, yeah, but we've got to be in the trade to control it. You know, we got to sell them something that's nuclear. Mr. Reed is someone I'm not that familiar with. I don't have any connections to his staff. But he said something, and I saw it, and it immediately sounded so commonsensical. I'm not a Democrat, but I might vote for this guy. I think the proliferation dangers are so great, we should be able to wield all the influence we have, which goes way beyond this one transaction, to insist upon the same standards we applied to the Emirates. What he's saying in code is, we do not have to worry about them buying Chinese or Russian. We should just insist on it. Why? Because the security risks of us not getting exactly what we want are tremendous, and we have tremendous influence otherwise. Now, if it was just Mr. Reed, who's the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, well, you know, it certainly should go up on the chart, and it did. This is another guy. He has a certain way of being a little more concise. I love the king, but I said, King, we're protecting you. You might not be there for 2 weeks without us. I didn't vote for him, but you could see he has a way with words. It's pretty good. Now, if that's true, you simply tell the kingdom what you want, if they're really that dependent. If they're not, and you're kidding yourself, I would argue that would be a doubly good reason not to get involved in this, because whatever you cut in the way of a deal, you don't have leverage to get them to live up to. You don't have control of the thing anyway. It's kind of like a great truth argument, isn't it? Anything that's argued is wrong and you're right. But anyway, that's the argument I just made. The argument that comes back is, well, you don't understand nuclear deterrence. And for what it's worth, when you guys crack what that is, will you please send me a postcard? A friend of mine says nuclear deterrence is a little bit like, he was a mathematician originally, trying to divide an integer by 0. You know, that's not permitted in math. And the reason why is it's an unlimited or unbounded proposition. You can get any answer you want. You'll notice that deterrence is an important topic in the academic field. And the reason why is, well, there are an infinite number of possible answers. Now, that isn't to say nuclear deterrence doesn't matter, but it's a little slippery. For example, the argument that you get whispered by realists who use that term, they expropriate the word realist to make, well, I mean, that makes everybody else an idiot. So, you know, anyway, they call themselves realists. They say, well, if Saudi Arabia, if Iran already has a nuclear weapons option, then we give it, or we encourage it, or we allow it for Saudi Arabia, then 1 + 1 = 0, because they neutralize each other, and then they don't go forward. And then they argue, and even if, and as soon as you get to even if, you know you're in trouble, even if they go forward and they get a weapon, well, then the Saudis could get a weapon. And then, well, they neutralize one another, because they wouldn't want to fire at one another, because, well, that'd be awful, all right? So this notion that 1 + 1 always equals 0, or it equals 2, okay, in the second case. I actually think it, you know, 1 + 1 or 1 plus anything is some number that comes out equaling more than 2. What do you think the UAE is going to do? Well, it's going to follow in pursuit. What about the Egyptians or the Turks? Oh, and of course the Algerians actually don't get along with the Egyptians. And then there are the Israelis. We'll talk about all this. My guess is you are basically trying to clean tar by using lots of tissue. You're not going to get ahead on this. All right. Well, so we're already in number 4, right? What are the proliferation implications of proceeding? Are they really manageable? I mentioned that the UAE might be interested. Why might we have to worry about them? Don't we have an agreement where they forswore making enriched uranium or separating plutonium? And we do. It's called the gold standard of non-proliferation nuclear cooperation conditions. There's only one problem. There's an addendum. It's the equal terms and condition addendum. And what it says is that the U.S. will not reach any agreement for cooperation in the region such that the UAE will have less favorable terms than whatever we strike with someone else. Not only that, our agreement with Egypt says the same thing. You see where we're going? They have, if not a right to be able to demand equal treatment, they at least have the right to demand negotiations to get equal treatment. And in diplomacy, that kind of thing has a way of being real. We have pending agreements with this kind of language in Egypt, Morocco, Turkey, and we're trying to strike one with Jordan. That's a lot to deal with. Not only that, but let's talk a little bit about Israel. At the time of the India agreement in 2005, the Israelis began circulating a white paper. Does anybody, I mean, I shouldn't be jumping around using language like the India deal in 2005. Does anybody know what the heck I'm referring to? Well, there's some shaking heads. By the way, the other job you have as a graduate or undergraduate is to say, I don't get it. If you sit there and smile, you're making a big mistake. You need to learn how to frown and go, and then that's it. Then I go, oh, crap, he doesn't understand. Let me slow down. Okay, so the deal in 2005, what did we do? The Indians never signed what's called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968. So they were never under an obligation not to get nuclear weapons. They got nuclear weapons, essentially in '74. And then we decided, oh, we thought the Indians would be perfect as a hedge against China. Now, I'm not sure that was a complete thought, but that's what we thought. And we wanted to somehow reward them for what they were going to do for us in dealing with China. And someone hit on the notion, well, why don't we stop sanctioning them for having violated various U.S. laws and for being a weapons state under the NPT, all the nations of the world would not sell them nuclear fuel, enriched uranium, or for that matter, even natural uranium. And the reason why you wouldn't do that is under the NPT, it says you should not help a country get nuclear weapons. And if you gave India even natural uranium, it would free up their scarce amount of natural uranium that they were using to make bombs and to power their power reactors. If you sold them uranium just to power their power reactors, it would free up all of their uranium domestically to make more bombs. So, long story short, we went ahead anyway. I thought it was a mistake. I lost several contracts with the State Department telling the world what I thought, as if it mattered what I thought. In any case, the Israelis at the time said, you know, we have nuclear weapons too. Of course, we haven't said it. We'd like a deal just like the Indians. Well, can you imagine what would happen if we let Saudi Arabia get enrichment? The Israelis would push, I suspect, to be allowed to get civil nuclear imports of some sort on the basis that, well, my God, you know, you've let Iran and Saudi Arabia enrich. Why can't we be treated the way you treat India? It's time. We're a close ally. Now, I don't know how seriously to take this, but on the record, the United States is arguing that it wants a better deal with Iran. Here we have a quote, pretty recent. It was the case prior to us getting out of our deal with Iran that we were arguing that, well, Iran, the deal we have with Iran should be a model for the deal we have with Saudi Arabia. And in fact, the deal, according to the New York Times, that was cut with Saudi Arabia and offered, said that they couldn't enrich for 15 years. Well, that's the same period of time we had restrictions, at least on some of the enrichment activity in Iran. So in a sense, we offered them a version, according to the New York Times, of the deal that we had with Iran. Now, the problem is now we pulled out of the deal. Now things get flipped. Now whatever we do with Saudi Arabia becomes a model for whatever better deal we might, do with Iran. This is getting kind of complicated. Now, we've been here before. In the late 70s, we were offering the Shah of Iran all kinds of nuclear assistance. And at one point, Jimmy Carter more or less overruled his staff and said, I'll give him anything he wants. He wants reprocessing plants, whatever. I don't care. That didn't happen because he was run out of office. He got sick. He died. But we do not know any more about the future of Saudi Arabia than we did about the future of Iran. The Shah and his regime went away. That turned out to be a real problem, having nuclear energy in Iran. If you have actual plants built in Iran to a large number, you have a big problem, but the same would possibly apply to Saudi Arabia. Then there's the ROK. If they sell reactors in the Middle East and they allow enrichment, they are trying to petition us to get us to allow them to enrich for nuclear submarines. How are we going to argue against this? If they enrich or reprocess and they get more of a bomb option, what will that do to Japan's plans to reprocess and enrich, which are kind of on ice for the moment? And how does that relate to China? You can see everything in a paranoid mind is related. You know? All right. Well, what should we do? I like this one. I really think that politics, both good and evil, must, and it is always, simple. The more sophisticated it gets, the less it becomes real policy. I think this is the starting point now. And people in Washington are having a hard time